Well, after watching that, there's only one thing to say.
That was rough.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Was It Good? My name is Bob, and tonight we're going to be talking The Chosen Season 4, Episode 3. Now, I previously saw this season when it was in theaters, and I got to admit, this is the episode that I was really dreading rewatching.
Do we have to talk about this?
Yes, we do, because I do think that this episode is a turning point for several of our characters, and it does define the direction that a lot of the season goes. Now, before we get into the review, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. For those that are waiting for my Season 3 review, I am still working on it. I should have it out pretty soon, but I'm almost done with that. Also, for those that are interested, I do have another YouTube channel with a couple of my friends where we put on a show called Dad's Turn to Talk. This is an opportunity for three dads to get together and talk about the things that we want to talk about, including movies, television, sports, and have a little bit of fun at each other's expense. Now, I bring up that channel because the two co-hosts with me on that show, they're Jewish. They've heard about The Chosen, and they want to know what makes this show so special. So they want to go ahead and watch a couple of episodes, and they're going to give their perspective of what they think about the show. And we did think that that would be interesting to talk about. So if you're interested in that, the link to that channel will be in the description below. Go ahead and head over there, subscribe to that, and hit the notification bell so that way you'll know when the episode comes out. We are looking at it releasing on the 27th. Now, as far as this particular episode goes, there are going to be some spoilers because we have a lot to talk about. So if you haven't seen episode 3, I suggest you go ahead and go over to the Chosen app and check it out because there's a lot that happens there and you don't want to have it spoiled for you. Now, if you have seen the episode, I'd like to know what you thought about it. Why don't you go ahead and share your comments in the comments section below and let me know what you thought. Did you like the episode? Did it cause you to get out the box of tissues? Just let me know what you thought about it. As always, don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get to it. When Jesus heals a blind man on the Sabbath, religious leaders gather to confront him, which draws a riotous crowd. As Gaius defies a direct order to arrest Jesus, Quintus takes matters and the life of someone we love into his own hands. Now, when I alluded to this episode being pretty rough, I got to admit that's actually an understatement because when this episode first came out and I saw it on the big screen, I thought to myself, this is the toughest episode of The Chosen yet. And I got to admit that my jaw literally hit the floor because I did not see that coming. And I probably should have because I do think that it's alluded to, and I'll get to that in a moment. But this is a really tough episode to watch. Now, with that being said, there's actually quite a bit of things that I like about it. The first thing I like is that this episode asks a really hard question, and that is why certain people don't get healed and others do, or why certain prayers for healing are not answered and others are. So we see that through the prologue first with King David, where he's asking God to heal his son that had just been born to Bathsheba, and it doesn't happen. And so then David, of course, washes himself and then just makes the decision he's going to continue to worship God no matter what. You parallel that later to Rama's death, in which as she's dying, she tells Thomas to keep following Jesus. And so Thomas is faced with a very similar choice here. Does he go off another way or does he continue to walk with Jesus despite what happened to Rama? Now, what's interesting in that scene is that Jesus comes there and he's there to comfort Thomas and he tells him that he loves him, but he's not going to heal Rama or bring her back. And that really affects Thomas, as you see there at the end of the episode. And I do think that because of the way they handled this scene, it asks that hard question. And that's, like I said, one thing I really like about the episode. Now, as far as the death scene itself, I got to say that I don't necessarily like that they killed her off, but I think it is very effective because some of my favorite shows have killed off major characters or characters that you've become invested in, and it has a profound impact on the audience and the direction that the rest of the season or the show is going to go. And Rama is a character that we've become very invested in, and she's very integral to people's lives. And to see her taken away like that, you know it's going to affect specific characters, specifically Thomas. And because Gaius and Quintus were involved in this, you know it's going to affect where they're going to end up. And so it's going to change the trajectory of several characters. Will this be the event that causes Thomas to become the doubting Thomas that we all know? So, like I said, I think it is very effective. Also, I got to admit, I didn't see it coming. Now, I should have seen it coming because they do foreshadow it in the scene where you have Thomas and Rama talking, and they're talking about all the time that they want to have together. And you could just get the feeling that it's being foreshadowed. Plus, when you add in the prologue, it's being foreshadowed. And so I should have seen it, but it still caught me off guard. Another thing I like is how Gaius basically allowed Quintus to hang himself because earlier in the episode, Quintus loses his cool and comes down on Gaius because he supposedly hadn't made things rough for the followers of Jesus, which, let's be honest, he didn't. But he comes down on him for that. And this all was because he found out that his tax revenues weren't where they were supposed to be. And so Quintus is very upset about this. And that plays into later when the whole scene at the end is really getting heated, and Atticus shows up and tells Gaius, hey, you need to get a message over to Quintus because this is going to define the rest of his career. And so Quintus, of course, shows up, and or should say just before that, as Quintus is on his way, Atticus comes up to Gaius and is like, hey, you need to do something about this. And he's like, well, I already passed your message on. And you see Atticus say, well, has the preacher gotten to you? And then he stops and he's like, "Oh, I see what you're doing. You're basically you're going to let him hang himself." And well, not in those words, but basically that's what he's saying because at this point, if a riot breaks out, that could really hurt Quintus's future because the Romans, they just want to try to keep the peace. They don't want all of these uprisings in their areas, and that's the whole point of what Atticus is trying to put this to rest. And he wants Gaius to get control of it, or I should say, he wants Quintus to get control of it. And it just everything just kind of gets real heated. But it's interesting to see how Gaius just kind of steps back and let Quintus hang himself. And then when Quintus turns around and is like, hey, I want you to go arrest Jesus, Gaius is like, no. He just flat out refuses to. Now, I do think it is that he's trying to help Jesus, but I do think he's got some ambition there, and he sees an opportunity to get Quintus out of the way. And so I think he takes it. Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's just kind of what I took away from it. Another thing I really liked was the whole interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees. It's a lot more intense in this episode than it has been in previous episodes. Now, it all starts because Jesus heals a blind man, and the Pharisees turn around and take the blind man into the synagogue, and they're like, so you were born blind? Oh, and he's like, yeah. And they're like, oh, well, how do you heal you? Well, he put mud on my eyes, and they're like, aha, he healed on Shabbat, and he's performing sorcery. So we've got him. And it just amazes me that there was a guy here born blind who can now see, and yet what they're worried about is the fact that he healed on Shabbat, and it's because they saw their opportunity to get him on this one. In fact, the blind man even turns around and says, you know what? I don't know who he was or what was going on, but what I do know is I was once blind, but now I see. And I thought that that was just a very profound statement, and it kind of shows where the Pharisees are at in their mind because you have this miraculous thing happen, and all they're focused on is, well, now we can get him. And so, sure enough, they go and they confront him, and it becomes very heated. And Jesus doesn't really back down. I love how when they ask him, so what'd you do to heal him? Oh, well, I just got some mud and I spit in it and put it on his eyes, and they're just horrified by this. And so I just thought it was just a really cool scene. And Jesus doesn't hold back on any of his teachings. He basically calls out their hypocrisy by saying, you only care about having the best seats in the synagogue, and you only care about what's clean and unclean, and you forget about what's on the inside. And so I thought it was very profound teaching, and I like how the whole scene was handled because ultimately all the different storylines come together right at the end. And I thought that that was just so well done that they were able to bring all the different storylines together in that heated moment. So I just thought that was really cool. And just a couple of other things that I really liked was I liked the whole scene where Thomas gives Rama the sundial. I thought that that was just very heartwarming, and it's sad that we're not going to see the two of them get married because I thought that was very heartwarming, and we've enjoyed their relationship up to this point. And then I really like Salome. Now I heard somebody say that Salome, the way she was acting, that it was out of place for her, and that it just didn't make sense. To be honest, I think that it does. And the reason I think that it does is because if anybody can think back to conversations that they've had with their mother is always pushing them to be better. And I think that's what Salome is doing here. I don't think she's trying to be uh ungrateful or jealous or anything like that. Even though we have seen some jealousy with James and John as far as with Peter, because they're looking for themselves to be elevated. But I think their mother here is saying, all right, well, you know what? Go get what you're worth. You guys know what you're worth. Go get it. Go ask for it. And I think that's where it's more. She just wants to see what's best for her kids. And I just like the way that it's handled, because it's handled in a very humorous way. Like I said, there's a lot of things to like about this episode. Now, real quick, there's a couple of things that I didn't like. Just from a personal standpoint, I am going to really miss the Rama character, and I hated that they killed her off, especially in such a brutal fashion by having Quintus stab her. But you know what? Like I said, it is an effective story tool, and I do think it is going to have profound impacts on our characters. But just from a personal standpoint, I didn't like that they killed off the character. Also, I got to say that it didn't make sense that Quintus's tax revenues were all of a sudden in the negative, because if you go back to episode 2, Atticus actually refers to his tax revenues as being spectacular. And all of a sudden now, just a few days later, they're in the negative. I just find that a little hard to believe. Maybe what they should have done is have Atticus turn around and say, hey, you know what? Your tax revenues have been good, but they are decreasing. So you need to do something about that. So maybe that little line fix would have made that a little bit better. And also when it comes to Rama's death, when she and Thomas are running up towards the front, and that's when Quintus turns around and stabs her, couldn't they have gone the other way? I mean, it just looked like to me they could have gone the other way. Now, maybe I'm wrong and I missed something there, but I just think that they could have gone the other way. It just didn't seem to make sense that they were running up towards the front. And I understand why it happened, because the plot needed it to happen. But just something, maybe if I go back and watch it a third time, I'll notice some soldiers there or something that I missed on this rewatch. So I am going to go back and check that out. But other than that, those are really the only things I didn't like about the episode. Now it's time for the question that I always ask on this channel. Was it good? Absolutely. This is another great episode, but this one is very tough to watch, especially if you're invested in the show and in the characters. Now, it's got great production quality. It's very well acted through this episode, and I really like the way that all the storylines come together right at the end. I think this is a very good episode, and it's going to change the trajectory of several of our characters. So, again, very well done. Now, if you're still watching this long, I'd like to thank you for still watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.